I can still remember the day that my life changed forever. I was in the second grade. It was about a late March evening, about 6:30 at night. It was a dark and rainy night when my dad, my brother Skylar, and I were just sitting in the living room, not quite sure what to do. See, for years before, my dad had been telling me about this gift that he had that was a big part of his life. And for years, I'd seen it on his bookshelf, and I'd wonder, when am I finally get to learn for that myself? So, on this dark, rainy March evening, my dad goes upstairs into his bookshelf and brings down one of the greatest gifts of my life. The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, was put into the DVD player, and I was introduced to the second greatest story of all time. You see, I was instantly all in on Lord of the Rings, and I poured so much into it. I could see myself in each of the characters, not the bad ones, though, thankfully. I learned the history. I read the books of the world that Tolkien created. I learned to do an impression of Gollum, which, yes, I do take money to do. I've done a 24-hour marathon watching all 6 Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies in their extended editions in a row. Yes, it is worth it, and I highly recommend it with a group of friends. I have even gone so far as to tattooing the sword Sting and the symbol around the ring on my arm. See, when the weather was nice, there was a forest that was about 2 miles down the road from where we lived. And we would just go there, and it looked just like Fangorn Forest, if you know anything about Lord of the Rings. My brother, my sister, my dad, and I, my mom wasn't a big fan of Lord of the Rings, so she didn't come sometimes. But we would go, and we would just pretend and immerse ourselves in the characters. We would pick up sticks as swords or bows, and we would pretend to recreate battles. Sure, Lord of the Rings might just be a story or some movies, but to me, it's joy. It's time that I got to spend with my family. It's memories playing in the forest, being stupid. It's embarrassing myself by nerding out in front of my wife, telling her all these things about Lord of the Rings for her really not to care and to not like the movies because they're too long. These movies are comfort to me. See, if my dad had never taken the time to show us these amazing movies that he loved, my passion for them would not be anything like it is today. Lord of the Rings is fantasy. But the gospel, it's alive. It is real, and it is the greatest story ever told. It is the reason why each of us is here. It is the heartbeat of our ministries, and it is the reason why we put everything on the line to reach the world around us. On Tuesday, we got to hear from my dear brother Brawlin, who spoke on 1 Corinthians 4, where he taught us how God is turning trash into treasure. And the passage that I have been given today is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 27. So, if you have your Bibles, I encourage you to flip there. It is going to be on the screen behind me. But this is just such a beautiful text that shows us the heart behind Paul's ministry. So, let's jump into verse 19. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. The first part of this passage, verses 19 through 23, shows us the point to be who God calls you to be. Each and every one of us in this room has a calling from God. Some of you, it's a call to ministry. Some of you, it's just a call to love people. And honestly, there are some of you in here who really don't have a clue what God has called you to yet. But we know from the example of Paul that we need to be adaptable for the gospel. Paul experienced every possible situation imaginable, both good and bad, for the gospel, and yet he still sought to become all things for the some. In Acts 21, we see Paul participating in Jewish purification ceremonies while in the midst of his ministry. Paul had no reason to partake in these. It didn't do anything for him in this context, but the reason that he chose to participate in these ceremonies was to be able to build a bridge with the Jews. In Acts 17, we see Paul speaking to Greek philosophers at Mars Hill. And these philosophers, they had an understanding of gods that was polytheistic. They did not believe in just one God. But somehow, Paul reaches deep into their understanding of the gods, and he shows them that even they realize there is one who is greater. He is the one who came down in flesh, who died a criminal's death, and conquered the grave to make the way for all of us. Paul went after the weak. He went for the people who really nobody cared about and who nobody wanted. He walked with them and he showed them the love of God through every single step of the way. Paul was whoever God called him to be in ministry because he cared about being adaptable for those who needed to hear the gospel. As a parent, I have to adapt in my daily life. My son, Woodland, can you hold him up Lion King style for me? That's my boy. He's the cutest baby that exists, and if you try and say otherwise, I will fight you for it. But my son is one who loves to be entertained, and sometimes the things that made him laugh yesterday don't apply today. Some nights I'm making fart noises to make him laugh. Others I have to tickle his belly or blow raspberries on him. Sometimes it's me chasing him down the hallway pretending to be in slow motion so that I can't catch him. And my personal favorite is when I just get to lay next to him, tell him what's going on around him and how much I love him. Parenting is adapting to every situation possible because emotions change and every single day is different. One of the things God has called me to be is to be who my son needs me to be. Just like Paul was called to be whatever God needed him to be, and how God has called you to be whatever he needs you to be, so that you can reach those around you. Paul was called to all situations in his life, but as he said, he has become all things for some. He didn't do it for everyone. He did it for some. Have you ever realized that at one point in your life, you were this some that Paul is talking about? You would have been somebody that Paul would have walked alongside, who he would have preached the gift of the gospel to. You were once among the some, but now you have the opportunity to follow in the path of those who have come before you. You may each be very talented in this room. I have no doubt about that. But I promise you that no matter how hard you try or how badly you want it, you can't save everyone. You can't fix everything. You can't reach everyone who you come into contact with. But you can save some. There are so many people in your life who haven't yet heard the gospel and are in desperate need of it, but they may never hear it if you aren't willing to share it with them. If you're not willing to get in the dirt beside them, and if you're not willing to adapt and become all things that God needs you to be. Paul took the time in his ministry to get to know the people he was ministering to. He built tents in their communities. He walked with them. He got down on their level and was willing to do whatever it took to reach some. Not all, some. Don't focus on chasing the masses of people. Focus on the some. We may be able to adapt for the gospel and become all things that God needs us to be for the some, but it's important to realize that there is more that goes into this, that requires what Paul talks about in the rest of this passage. In verse 24, Paul switches the topic and gives us our next point, which is to be self-disciplined for your witness. In verses 24 and 25, he talks about what it means to have worldly discipline for temporary rewards. Now, I do think it's important to provide some context for this section, because you may be wondering, Paul's talking about ministry, why the heck is he talking about a foot race? See, in the culture of Corinth, it was highly competitive on a level that we could compare to the Olympics today. It held Olympic-style games that people gathered from far and wide to witness, and it was highlighted by a foot race that was the pinnacle of competition, and this is the race that Paul is referencing. If I'm being honest, I hate running with a burning passion. I am not a natural-born sprinter. I was not gifted with speed, athleticism, endurance, or honestly, any desire to run at all. I think it's stupid and a waste of time. But my brother, Skylar, he was a collegiate hurdler in my family. And I remember watching how hard he would train for his races. He had to focus on every single detail of the race, from how he released out of his starting blocks, how many steps he had to take in between each hurdle, how he could best glide over them, and then how he would sprint to the finish to be able to win the race. We read Paul referencing this big prize that everybody coveted. It was a crown or a wreath that would be placed on the winner's head. This crown was a symbol of victory, of pride, of accomplishment, of overcoming all others who they had faced. A symbol that would wither away, petal by petal, and eventually die. A symbol that meant so much for so little time and disappeared as though they had never even won in the first place. Worldly rewards don't mean much in the grand scheme of eternity, which is why he talks about what it means to be a holy disciple for eternal rewards. This is what Paul is saying when he has said he's become all things for all people. He is serving God for the reward in eternity of being able to stand there and walk with the people he has brought with him. Paul does nothing that will discredit his witness throughout his ministry. He says that he strikes a blow to his body to be disciplined so that those some he is trying to reach, they may see how Paul lives, and that brings them closer to Jesus. The majority of the New Testament is written by Paul. I don't think any of us is going to argue that. Paul is responsible for the spread of the church into the known world at the time, and responsible for discipling pastors who shaped the cities and churches around them, the Timothys and the Tituses. Paul deserves all the recognition in the world for everything that he did, but for some reason, and I've tried to find it, I can't find anywhere in my Bible where I find Paul wanting the glory. I can't find Paul doing it to get his name lifted up. No, I find Paul giving it back to God through all things so that he may reach the Son. In Matthew 6:19, while Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." You guys, nothing that we store up on this earth is coming with us at the end. Not your job title, not your money, not your fancy toys. It's all temporary, trash, rubbish. But everything that we do for the gospel, that is what matters. The people who you share the gospel with and they accept that gift of salvation and grace from God, They are what matter. If you're going to be a messenger for Christ, then you better be practicing what you're preaching. When we face difficult times in our life where we fall short, and trust me, they will come, there are always people who are going to see it, which is why we need to be disciplined in how we live for Christ. It is discipline to adapt to every situation that the devil tries to throw at you so that you can continue to live in a way that points everyone back to Jesus. Matthew 5:16 says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." If you want to be a holy disciple, then you better practice what you're preaching so that you can be the most effective witness to reach the some around you. I think we've all heard the phrase that ministry is not going to be easy. And don't you think if it were, that more people would be going into it? See, to me, this difficulty should be seen as a gift. And there are so many people who take this gift and they crack under the pressure and they make stupid mistakes in ministry that hurt the witness of Christ. Some of us are about to go into ministry once we leave here. And so to you, I ask, how are you going to guard your life and what you do so that everything you do reflects God? For those not going into ministry, and this applies to everyone as well, how do you live your life in a way that makes people notice there's something different about you? There's something special in your life that I don't quite have. Our identity is found in Christ, and that is what people should see when they look at us in our moments of weakness. In our moments of failing, they should see Christ. People are always watching, and if we can't be self-disciplined for that gospel in our lives, then what is the point? What's the point? The point is that we must reach the some. That is the whole reason why we are here, guys, to reach the some. The gospel is alive and it is actively working in your life that you may not, in ways that you may not see or you may not understand, but God is moving. And since God and the gospel are moving in your life, then I ask, why aren't we moving the gospel how we could be? Why do we get to sit here in these comfy chairs where it's no big deal that we get to worship God, when halfway around the world there are people who are being imprisoned or killed for trying to reach the some? I want to share some numbers with you just because I think this is important to understanding everything. There are about 2.4 billion Christians in the world. That's a great number, right? That's huge. Can anybody fathom 2.4 billion? No. David can. Glad to know. 2.4 billion. That just leaves about 5.6 billion who are not Christians. That is the sum, ladies and gentlemen. 5.6 billion sum. There's about 122 million in the United States alone who are not Christian, and yet that number is growing rapidly as we enter an age where Christianity is no longer the majority or the morality. The country is shifting. Less and less people are becoming equipped for ministry, and the message of the gospel isn't being shared how it could be. Think of the people in your life who haven't yet heard the gospel, and I want you to think of one person specifically. They are among the some. The person who is in desperate need of the gospel that conquered death and that millions have died for throughout history. Nobody would die for a message that they don't believe in, and yet throughout the Bible and church history, I see the example of the apostles. Men who were called by Jesus, who walked with Jesus, who ate with Jesus, who slept in the same room as Jesus, who watched him preach and reach and heal, who watched him be carried away and put to death on a cross. Apostles who mourned his death and celebrated in his resurrection. I see these apostles responsible for the church being beheaded, upside down crucified, regular crucified, being pierced by spears, stabbed, stoned, clubbed, burnt, and cast into oil, all for a gospel that they weren't afraid to reach the sum for. You were once among the sum, and God chased you down through every mistake that you've ever made, through every rough day where you question, God, why would you put me in this? Why would you create me like this? God is continuing to reach into your life through those moments. God chased the nation of Israel as they continually turned away from him towards other gods and other people. They were among the sum, and yet God never wavered for them. God seeks the one sheep who is lost, even though he knows there are 99 safe back at home. He goes for the sum. And we should follow in the footsteps of our Creator and those who have come before us to reach the sum. Think about the person in your life who may have been hurt by the church and show them the love of the Father. Think about that person in your life who may just be a day from ending it all because they have no more hope. Show them that they have a purpose, that they are fully known and fully loved by God. That neighbor who you see every day and know they are in desperate need of hope of the gospel, they are the sum. We meet those every day who need the gospel, and we have the opportunity to share this incredible gift of grace through the sacrifice that Jesus made when he died on that cross. If you don't share the gospel with the sum, who will? Who? What if they never get to hear the gospel because we were too comfortable in our little chairs, or we were too afraid to share it with them? What does their eternity look like after that? Now imagine the opposite. What if the sum does hear the gospel? What if they accept Christ and they feel so excited about this new relationship they have, then they go tell their family. And you know what? Their family feels that too. It burns inside them and they accept that gift. They are no longer among the sum because they have become a part of the kingdom of God. The kingdom has the potential to multiply exponentially on a level that you will never see beyond your lifetime and you will never truly understand. But you will one day, all because you were bold enough to do all things so that you may reach the sum.